Welcome, everyone, to the Aspen City Council work session of March 9th. Hope you've had a great... Okay, she doesn't like this one. Welcome, everyone who's attending in person or online. Tonight's work session on March 9th is going to focus on some of the documents and legal agreements we will be moving forward with on the Lumberyard first up, and then a secondary discussion about the impactful private sector development projects, where they are currently and where we hope to see them move forward. Let me ask, just in case, does anybody have any questions on the information item that was the Wheeler Opera House update and others that we might want to have staff discuss with us at a future time?
Just the kudos.
Just, on the Wheeler.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Impressive report, I thought.
Yeah, for some really good direction going there. So we will go on to the Lumberyard first, and please come on up, Rob, and our guest from Gorman.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, Rob Schober, Asset Director, and I'm here with Kimball from Gorman, who you have previously met. Fortunately, Chris isn't able to join us tonight, so you guys are stuck listening to me. We're here tonight to, we're going to run through a number of items in preparation for the financial closing, the first financial closing for the Lumberyard project. We're talking about closing number one, which is just the first building and the phase 0 infrastructure work. Right now,
Are they all working?
I was hearing an echo. Right now, we're on target to close here, hopefully the late March, early April. Construction is beautiful out, so we'd like to get started as soon as possible on construction after that. And closing number 2 is scheduled next year for 2027. And closing number 2 will be for the second and third buildings. Tonight, like I said, we're going to run through a number of agenda items. We're going to go through a summary budget for the first closing. We're going to talk in some detail about the closing documents and what those entail. We're going to review an APSHA board request for an additional priority that kind of slots in with the EPP. We're going to touch upon some of your questions and concerns from the previous work session on design changes from the original PD docs, and give you an update on the permit status. And then we'll talk next steps. So as we go through this, feel free to just interrupt and ask questions however you want, or we can do it all at the end. It doesn't matter to myself or Kimball. So.
Well, hello. It's Kimball Krangle with Gorman & Company. It's nice to see you all again. Thanks for this great weather. We wish we were under construction already, but soon we hope. So for closing one, we are talking about phases 0 and building 1 of 104 units. The estimated total development cost of just over $141 million. Our sources include a first mortgage, private equity, Gorman Equity, and City of Aspen funds for both phase 0 and then for building 1. And then you can see the uses that are there. And please interrupt as we go if you have any questions, or we can go to the end.
I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here again, Kimball, in person. We appreciate it. And thanks for filling in, Rob. The private equity is Gorman raised free market equity, correct?
Yes.
Is that raised already, allocated?
We're out for
ready?
solicitation now, and we've gotten hard commitments on about a third of that,
Okay.
With hard commitments expected over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
No concern about being ready in the next 3 to 4 weeks when you say we're going to close?
I do not have concerns about that.
And when will that be? Is that due pro rata? Like, is it being called pro rata, or is it required to be in place
At closing?
at closing?
If it's not, that's a great question. If it's not in at closing, we bridge and then take them out shortly thereafter.
Okay, so no concerns if that raise is not complete. Great. And then similar question on the city funds. Are we tell me a little bit about the process of how we're sort of writing those checks to you.
Sure.
Does that go, construction draws, do we issue pro rata? Is there, just curious what the setup's going to be.
It is construction draws, and I can go really deep or really high level. So let me start high
level's
level.
fine for me. but
Okay.
If anyone else wants
It'll
to.
be pro rata. So at our closing, there will be kind of a larger amount due for pre-development that Gorman has been financing, as well as some of our initial modular deposits that are due. And then it will be a pro rata draw monthly.
Perfect, with full backup, just like a normal GC's construction draw, essentially showing where all the dollars are going.
Absolutely, yes. And our mortgage will have a lender inspector, full lien waiver support, everything that we would expect for any job, and especially for a job this size.
Great. I think that's good for me, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, carry on.
We can go to the next slide.
All right. As I said, we're going to discuss in a little more detail the closing documents and what they entail. And they're really, like you think about the money piece, but there's a group of documents that work together here that you'll be asked to review and approve here at the next meeting. The deed restriction documents, document detailing the ground lease, the operating agreement between the city and Gorman, development services agreement between the city and Gorman, and then a special limited partnership addendum. So I'm not going to roll through all these points, but again, you can read and feel free to ask any questions. But deed restrictions run along with APSHA deed restrictions, ensure the affordability of all the units in perpetuity, survives foreclosure, and occupancy and the way those are written are per the APSHA regulations. The key pieces to pay attention to on the ground lease is that the city does retain ownership of that land. It's a 40-year initial term with an optional 20-year extension. After 15 years, the city holds the option to purchase the improvements on the property. And then at the end of the lease period, everything reverts back to us. So the operating agreement, again, that's between the city and Gorman, and that outlines in detail kind of what's expected of Gorman, what's expected of the city. It protects our ownership interests. It puts guardrails around the financial structuring of the operating agreement, like reserves, where proceeds are going, and governs distributions. And it ensures compliance and affordability with the ground lease. Gorman will be handling everything, so leasing up property management, turnover, capital improvements, as long as they're operating under that agreement. The development services agreement is what we were talking about with construction. So development services agreement is for design and construction of the facility. It defines their fees, their payment terms. It consigns the construction risk to the developer, and it gives us the right to review their work set in place. We'll be reviewing all the pay apps. We're going to hire some third-party people to be looking at things going on as they get put in the ground, and we'll have the ability to like raise a flag if something's up and we don't like what we see. And the last piece is that special limited partnership addendum, and basically what that does is it admits APSHA as a partner to the Lumberyard facility, and what that does is it gives us property tax exemption is basically it. There's nothing required of APSHA day to day, but it does, without having to pay property taxes, it makes the pro forma and their operating costs less annually, so.
Bill?
Thanks. What provisions do we have in these documents regarding Gorman's ability or restriction to sell their interests?
You have a lot, especially in the operating agreement. There are a number of items that the city has to affirmatively vote on with the other investor members as well. So it will be Gorman as a member, the city member, and then investor members. And those all would require a vote. And in that document, the city, obviously would have the desire to make sure if we were to sell or replace ourselves, that it's going to be somebody that can operate effectively. So the agreements do speak to that. And I pointed over at Kate because she's been heavily involved in these
Great.
as well. So that provision is included.
Okay, and is that throughout the life cycle or only post-completion?
It's throughout the life cycle. During construction, there are provisions for replacing Gorman via if there's a default, and really they're, the classic bad boy provisions, and our lender would have that as well.
Okay, if it's not already there, I would love to see a restriction on sale, on a Gorman-initiated sale until the project is leased up and stabilized.
We did talk about that on our last turn, so I will make sure, that's not a surprise to hear. City staff and the attorney brought that up last time, so if it's not included, that was.
They didn't tell me to say that, if it makes you feel any better.
You're right on
Came
track.
up with that one on my own. I think that would be good. I think that affirms your commitment, and I don't have any problem with a potential exit long-term, assuming we have sort of rights to approve the successor, but unless things are going really wrong, which it should come from our side, not from your side, I don't think that there should be any possibility of a sale during construction and lease-up.
And we're fortunate that that has never happened to one of our projects, so, but we understand the concern.
Thanks.
When we bring these documents to you, we can point out some of these provisions and how we've drafted them. I will say, keep in mind, we're balancing making this project attractive to investors so that it can remain a private partnership and land private. So we are balancing those. We've had lots of discussions. We'll continue to have discussions, but we'll do our best to point out where we've addressed your concerns because they have come up in our negotiations.
Great.
And just to follow up, when you said there would be a vote of the investors, Gorman and the city, would that have to be unanimous?
Some have to be unanimous, some have to be majority. So there's a list of different provisions that would require that. But it's a long list that we can point out when we bring the documents, including a property management changeover, if Gorman were to sell, specific capital event moments, for example. But there are things that we cannot change. The deed restriction and the ground lease will be in primary positions and above any loan that would be on the property, which is great.
Thank you. I had a follow-up question on this as well. It's kind of different. But on the permanent affordability, if circumstances have changed in 15 or 20 years and the categories we have set now are not working and need to be revised upwards to actually keep the units occupied, is that something that the city and Gorman would be able to vote to change, or that is something that APCHA could change? I'm just thinking of the low-income tax credit situation we're in with units that we're finding people make too much money to actually occupy the units.
The quick answer is yes. It would require, cross-department conversations with APCHA regulations in the city of Aspen. I don't think our lenders would ever have an issue with that if it's more flexibility.
Going up rather than down.
But that would definitely have to require city direction to the project.
Absolutely. I just wanted to make sure, again, thinking about future generations, and sometimes we lock things in time and it really doesn't work out later. Okay, please continue. There's no other questions.
Okay. We wanted to run by council, and I think the APCHA board is looking for your feedback on this, that there was a request for a new priority for owners that were wanting to transfer into a rental unit from an ownership unit. So the intent of that, I believe, from the APCHA board is that they're not looking necessarily for it to be solely downsizing, but anybody looking to transfer, again, from an APCHA-owned unit to the rental units in the Lumberyard. So we don't expect this to be something that's all that popular. As a reminder, we did put something in for Burlingame 3, and that was specific for downsizing. I think we only had one taker on that. But there's a number of different ways that we could do it, kind of laid them out here, that one answer is that we choose not to offer a priority. You could choose to offer priorities for someone that is downsizing, so it'd be a downsizing only situation, like for like, 3-bedroom for 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom for 2-bedroom. You could allow upsizing, or you could allow any owner's rental priority. So if you have an ownership unit and you want to transfer it into a rental unit at the Lumberyard, you could do it pretty much for any reason if you're in, if one of those priority units is available. So our recommendation was to maybe hold 10 units for this, to might encourage some movement from ownership units occasionally to free up an ownership unit, and that it would slot alongside the employee partnership program. So it'd be below emergency workers and people looking for accessible units. Kimball doesn't have a problem with it if we want to do it. And again, I think the option board is looking for, I know they're looking for council's feedback on that request, so.
Well, let me ask our council APSA board reps first for any comments on this, and then we'll continue a discussion.
Well, we discussed it at length at APSA, and this is what came forward, so we do support, I support it, and I know the board did.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm more supportive of making it more general instead of just limiting to downsizing.
Same.
Yeah. I am supportive of this, but really want to drill down on the mechanism a little bit. When the first lease up is happening, there's obviously a lot of units at once. It's not as much of an issue if people get in line. But when there's re-rentals in turnover over time, just making sure it's a process that someone who wants to do that is, is able to let us know in advance, and it's not a last minute thing, and they're not bumping other people out of line if once a unit is advertised. I mean, I'm just trying to think how does the mechanism for, that being known occur. And so we could discuss that a little further at a future meeting, but if we're able to free up bedrooms through people who are downsizing, or people who do not want to be in an ownership situation anymore, would rather be in a rental situation. And there's plenty of people who would rather be in that ownership situation. I'd be happy to support this. But I just want to have us all drill down a little on the mechanics of how that happens after initial lease up, so that, maybe all 10 were to be taken. And I don't even, I don't know that we're saying where we've put this now, that it's 10 of the 40 units that might be available for the employee partnership program, or it's 10 on top, and it should just be a separate.
It's 10 on top.
Yeah, so maybe we'll just make it a separate number there, and it's not part of those EPPs, and we're not sure we'll be able to fill them all with employee or partnerships, but we'll find out. Any other comments, Bill?
I'm okay with this for downsizing only, but I don't understand the point of it otherwise. So supportive for downsizing only, unsupportive in any other structure.
Okay, well, I think the purpose is that when you look at the lotteries, there's a lot of people who don't get in every time, and the ability to free up another ownership unit, since this project and 250, 350,000, a million of our money is going into rental only, and we won't probably have any new ownership projects coming online for quite a while. I think that's the thought, is that, if you're able to free up units that people would like to invest in and be an owner in the community versus a part-time renter.
I get that, but I'm very concerned about people who have not invested well in their ownership unit over the years saying, oh, I can get out of this, secure a rental unit, and make capital repairs and expenses somebody else's problem in this ownership unit over time. That's my big concern.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I know that through APSA, a certain level of repairs are required by people as they leave a unit, and to be able to sell it, but it might not be as satisfactory as we'd all like, so I can understand that. Sam, you were going to chip in?
Oh, just saying, yeah, opening up ownership units is a lovely thought, and that They should be well-kept if they're going to partake in this program, and also they should have to almost sign a reminder that you don't necessarily retire in rental units. So what they're
You
giving
can
up-
retire in rental units
if you,
currently, if you've worked your years, yes.
in
That's
rental
why
units.
Bob Broadus was retired at Truscott. We definitely have retires in rental units.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I had heard that, but just not all of them. I thought you still had to qualify, but.
You have to qualify.
That's what I meant, like
Absolutely.
making sure these people qualify to be able to, just in
Okay.
case they're giving up something where they thought they could retire in and now they can't. That's all.
The work history is the key,
Yeah.
whether you're in an ownership unit or a rental, so.
Yeah, same difference, I guess.
Okay, just on your side of the table, we have choices here. Any owner to rental priority, upsizing, like for like, downsizing only? Did you guys have a preference, or the APTA board?
Preference was owner to rental, general owner to rental transfer, especially given that the expected low numbers that we would probably see on this anyway, the history of Burlingame. So opening it up for even just a few more.
And for the reason you already said, Rachel, is to open up some ownership units to the general public.
Yeah, I think Bill raises a valid concern, and perhaps we add our own standards for the quality of a room to allow someone, the unit they're leaving, to be able to move into this rental priority.
Yeah. I think that's a step in the right direction, but then there's like how much deferred maintenance is there on the common areas and the roof, and what's the condition of the HOA financially, and just a lot of concerns there that I feel like this is just ripe for someone to pass the buck.
Yeah,
Doesn't feel good to me.
well,
And why would we be good stewards with this tax revenue by sort of shifting this problem from one place to another place? Like, we are being good students by creating this new rental product, which fills, in my opinion, a new need in the community. By shifting people that are already housed in our community into this project, I don't know how that's the right decision. I don't know how that's a incrementally good thing.
okay. No, I appreciate that you have that opinion. I was just trying to look for a way that kind of made it through the middle. I think that you'll find that those issues you're talking about are there separate from this rental project altogether.
Absolutely.
And it's part of why I've been trying to call for a housing retreat to look at APSHA guidelines and how we can improve or deal with some of the, what are in some cases a true fiscal inequity between being sold a $400,000 unit for $125,000 appreciation capped and expect to keep it up to a $400,000 unit standard. And it's a bigger issue that we're having with our 50-year-old program. But again, how does the majority of the council feel?
I'd just make one final plea that this is not making this an incrementally better project, and it's opening up a can of worms to some unintended consequences, in my opinion.
Yeah.
One issue it I think potentially is trying to address is people who feel stuck in their ownership units. This gives them an off-ramp that's sort of adjacent to the conversation we had about subsidized moving or moving assistance. This is one different option for them, and I think that's one of the ideas about where this came from,
Yeah, that's fair, but what does the community get in return?
of an ownership unit.
Why is that better than a rental unit?
Well, because a lot of people don't want to be in a rental situation their whole life and check the I only rent on the credit forms when they get a credit card, pay higher interest rates, never develop any equity, and feel a sense of, well, what if I don't make my, what if I'm evicted for some reason? What if they don't want to lease me the unit next year? Living in a situation of insecurity is why a lot of people leave the valley, even though they have good jobs and good professions. Ownership means something different to people.
To each person. And some of those things are more valid than others, but in my opinion. Again,
Okay.
I think that the community should get something in return if we were to do this, and I don't see it. I don't see an incremental benefit here at all.
Okay, well, let's try to reach, I am going to side with these two guys as to saying any owner to rental priority. I would support that. I do think we should look at additional steps to make sure that we're not getting a pig in a poke for overwhelming repairs for any units that come into that program somehow. But John, go ahead.
Well, I would say that the reason this is in front of us is because we discussed it at the board level at APSHA. And it was decided that this, as a board, that this was something we wanted to move forward to Aspen City Council. That's why we're here tonight. I think there is that benefit, as you've already spoken to. Some people don't want the headaches of ownership, and they might want to prefer to be in a rental. It's just another option to give people. Furthermore, this wouldn't have been presented to City Council if APSHA wasn't thinking about having safeguards in place, which we've talked about for all the other units in our portfolio, not just this one. So I feel very comfortable moving this forward, knowing that if this becomes policy, that there will be safeguards in place.
Okay, so we have 3 so far. Bill, you definitely don't want to. Sam, what is your
For
opinion?
downsizing, I would do it. Downsizing.
For downsizing only, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as concerned. I think people would rather own than rent, so I do think there's that incentive there. But the thing I think we all almost agree with Bill on is just filling those loopholes to make sure people aren't using this in a nefarious way.
Yeah.
And that they're staying up to standards. But otherwise, if someone wants to give up their ownership unit for a rental, I think someone would be very happy to take that ownership unit.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I look forward to having a retreat, and should it not go forward as a county is still kind of sorting itself out in some levels, we might go with your suggestion of trying to come up with solutions to these individual problems and then send them over and see what we get from both the APSHA board and the county. So there is direction on that. We're going with option number 5 there, and we'll see what happens. Next questions for us.
Last time I was in front of you, there were some questions about how our current plans have deviated from the PD document set. The overarching answer is we took a plan set that had a ton of work put into it, but then we transitioned to a modular development, and so things just by nature changed. We also found some efficiencies and optimizations, in our opinion, as a property manager and owner-operator, for things that work really well. Everything from squaring up the building to be more modular specific in certain locations, really fine-tuning the building footprint for constructability. We like to put in certain closets in the developments that we build that are quite large for storage and have washer and dryer in it that our residents respond really well to. Again, operationally, having a roof over the garage entry ramp just to help with icing, removing green roofs on carports and putting those with more solar to meet the goals of the energy. There were questions about plumbing stacks. Nothing's on the external walls. We did add some more amenities to the community areas outside. The PD did have a sound wall along the path, along the property edge, and CDOT actually rejected that, so our plans have reflected that. And then just changed some specifications on some of the walls, the site walls within the site.
Thank you for that. Let me ask on the sound walls, I understand what you're dealing with. Is there any potential to have a very low wall next to the trees and landscaping that might reflect a little of the noise?
CDOT is who manages that for their plowing operations generally. So it's
Okay.
really about trees and some minor berming.
Okay. Is there any other location within the site to improve or replace sound walls for the residents more,
The major.
outside of CDOT's?
Yeah, that's
So-
the primary area where the sound was concerning. And so we are, with the trees and the landscaping, doing some buffering, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Bill, you have a question?
Thanks, yes, thanks for doing this. This is helpful for me. Two things stick out to me that I think I'd like to learn about a little bit more is one, the elevator reduction. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but like, is there some kind of industry standard rule of thumb that justifies this, or some other alternative that we're doing, like it's 50% of the elevator capacity that was originally there. I don't know what the original design was based off of, if it was 2x the rule of thumb, but I'd like to understand that one a little bit more. You can answer now or not. And then the other one would be that total gross floor area reduction is significant and impressive. And where's it coming out of? You know, are the hallways now, were they 5-foot hallways and now they're 3-foot hallways? Are they, you know, is there no lobby areas anymore? And some of these things may be acceptable to me, some of them may not be, but I'd like to sort of understand that a little bit better. And then also understand for both of these things is like, is the city benefiting from these cost reduction measures proportionally in some way, or is all the benefit accruing to Gorman?
So let me start with the elevators. This is what we would typically do. And so in our experience, 2 elevators is very sufficient for a building of this size. Elevators are kind of a pain to operate, and they're expensive. So that is right-sizing what we feel like is industry standard as far as we're concerned, and what has worked well for us in the past, and will continue to do so, sometimes by reducing to just 2. And I mean, quite honestly, in some buildings, we would have 1. So this is a little better than normal for us. And then we have stairwells that people can use as well. That benefit absolutely goes to long-term sustainability of this asset, which will at some point revert to the city as an asset. So yes, I think that's a benefit to the city. It also just allows us to fine-tune where we're spending our operating dollars over the long term. Did that answer your question on elevators?
Yeah, I think on that one, I'd just like to see if there's some kind of, I don't know if there's code requirements for
We meet
how much
code.
elevator is there. So obviously you meet code there, but if there's some kind of rules of thumb or something that, so that I can sleep at night going like, we didn't do something that is basically impossible to correct in the future.
Kimball, can you just chime in? I believe these buildings are 100% ADA accessible,
They're-
which is kind of above and beyond typical standards, and if we're meeting code for the, I guess I'll let you.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is above what I would consider to be standard by offering 2 elevators already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even for this is plus minus 100 units in this building, right?
And those elevators are big enough for people to be able to take some furniture up with them?
Oh, yeah.
Bed frames, things like that?
Yep.
Go ahead, Bill.
So that was point one. The other one is sort of just
The reduction.
the reduction of gross floor area and where it's coming from.
You do. You can show that. Oh, great. I didn't see that. So this is a slide we prepared. I'm glad. Thanks, Rob. So the PD was that blue color, and our massing is the black. So it's substantially, I mean, it looks very similar. The big changes are just as you move to a modular design, some things change. So while it looks like it's 7% sounds like a big number, the changes are really not impacting livability. And it's really to get us into a modular design with the modules that are available.
All that makes sense to me, Kimball, but I don't see 7% in that graphic. So I don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah, it's 3 stories, so that just adds up. But this is the change. This is the massing change.
Again, I think it's a good thing, right? If we can build a more efficient building that isn't sacrificing livability, it's a good thing. I'm not criticizing, like, the reduction number doesn't bother me, but I want to understand it, and I'm not understanding it on this graphic.
Well, you'll see that we moved some of the fenestration, the vertical kind of jut outs of the building to align better with some of the modules, but then also how it ran down into the garage. So we spent quite a bit of time looking at the garage level for efficient parking to maintain the parking standards that the PD did set. And there is an interplay between how your foundation of your garage walls meets the modules above. You do not want water infiltration between those two mechanisms, and they fit together. And that drove quite a bit of this.
Okay, well, I'll leave this with staff and just say, make sure you know where this square footage is coming from. Again, I'm not criticizing this.
Sure.
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing to build the building efficiently, but to make sure that it's a good building for the future of Aspen for the long term. Just make sure you understand if we're making any sacrifices, where they are, and whether those are good sacrifices to make. Thanks.
Well, I had the same question too, and I think it was just making sure that it was not, the unit sizes, residential unit sizes weren't affected, common space wasn't affected. None of that is any smaller than.
No, and we actually were able to add some community amenities outside that we like to see in our apartment communities. A pet area, for example, people will have pets, a little bit more of congregation areas that we wanted to see, playground, for example.
And the unit sizes on average across the whole building are going down by 3%. That's the net leasable there, which to me is okay, but
Yeah.
it's not nothing, it's not zero.
Well, if it's well-designed, it'll work out. Design. Okay, other questions or comments on this section? Thanks for those questions, Bill. They're good.
So there was a question about permit status and driving towards our closing date. Why are we driving so hard towards a closing date? It really is to give every day of constructability that we can take out of this building season. We all know what happens in winter in construction sites. We love to be able to build for as long as we can during the season. One of the questions that came up was around, at our last time that I was here, where our switch gear is going to bring the city of Aspen electric lines from the substation over by Lumberyard to the north. Is that north? East?
Yeah.
It's just
Kinda
up
northeast.
AABC, yeah, where it turns up. So those lines come down from that substation, and then will come down along AABC Road. So that general depiction has never changed. Then the question is, where do we put some of the infrastructure in to run the lines for the City of Aspen Electric with their requirements? We have two options identified. There is an optimal location that requires a slight easement modification, and then there is a less optimal but still quite feasible option that requires no entitlements whatsoever. Both are on the table. We understand that the optimal is ideal for the city. Just for some specifications, both work very well, and we'll try to get option A. If that doesn't work out, option B is absolutely feasible and works. I'm not sure what the question.
Just give me some heads up. I didn't have a question on that. I was just concerned that a plan wasn't in place, but it sounds like you've made some progress at least. But from a personal perspective, I have some ownership in the ABC, so please let me know where you're planning this easement thing so that if I'm conflicted, I can step out. You don't have to do it right now. We're not voting on anything now, I don't think, but
Okay, thank you.
unless Kate disagrees, of course.
We're not making any decisions tonight, but I appreciate the heads up, and we will reach out to you with some of those addresses to
Yep.
confirm your, whether or not you own any property within the vicinity. Thank
Great.
you.
I haven't been calling you, so that's at least good news.
That's true.
Okay. That's a good update. We appreciate that.
For sure. Thank you.
Okay, next steps. So our plan is to be back in front of you folks in 2 weeks. What's the word that you told me to use, substantially complete?
Substantially final form of
word.
documents.
She gave me the lawyer word to use, but anyways, to be back March 24th in 2 weeks. We'll have a resolution to approve those closing documents, as well as an update. It'll be an amendment to the existing resolution for the priority units. The APSHA board on Wednesday will hold a meeting to approve a resolution to enter into that limited partnership agreement with us, which gives us those property tax benefits. And then once that's complete, end of March, early April, depending for.
So yes, we are working very closely with various city departments to get us ready to close. This is a huge piece of the puzzle, obviously, is the resolution approving the closing and the funding of the project with all of the ancillary documents that go with that. Every other piece will be set to close. So we are really trying to push for the end of March, a couple days wiggle room, but we'd like to get started.
Yeah. And we would too. Further questions or comments in preparation for the March 24th meeting? John?
Just excited for this project to get started. This is a big step forward for Aspen.
Yeah. And thank you for being here. We'll answer our questions in person.
Of course.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other?
Thank you.
Okay, well, we will let you off the hook and give ComDev a few minutes to get their presentation set up, take a quick little break, and meet back here. Thank you. Welcome back to the work session of the Aspen City Council on March 9th. We're going to have an update on impactful development or absence thereof on some of the projects throughout town and some discussion about how to improve that situation in the future. So please take it away. We're excited to have you here.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. For the record, Ben and Bonnie from Community Development. This conversation this evening, I think, certainly reflects what Community Development understands to be broad community concerns about some specific properties and projects across town, but I think just general concern about, just the amount of construction activity that's taking place. And, Mayor Richards, through Pete, identified some specific projects that she had interest in talking about. And Pete asked us to put a work session together just to have a conversation this evening. So, I think we're both willing to go as far into the weeds as you would like to do in terms of individual projects or underlying causes or possible solutions. And certainly as we get to the end of this discussion, if there are ideas that we're not thinking about, that you've heard from others in the community, we're certainly willing to kind of take those with us and look into them a little bit further. But more than anything, just wanted to provide an opportunity for council to get a bit of an update on these projects and these properties that are, I think, of concern across the community. And then to the degree that you want to engage in a full-throated discussion about those things, we certainly can. So specifically, we want to talk about the projects and the categories of projects. The projects that the mayor identified, I think, really fit into three different buckets that I called out in the memo. We can provide some detail on these identified projects, a little bit about underlying causes of these languishing projects and properties, talk about the responses that have been investigated by staff. And I will say, and I said this several times in the memo, but this is the most frustrating part of Bonnie and I's work, is this topic. And it's confounding to us. We work on it every day. And in spite of those best efforts, I think, these projects continue to be of concern, and rightfully so. So this next slide is a fairly last-minute addition to the slide deck based on an email that I received this morning from Mayor Richards. Just to give a little bit of context before we talk about these projects, in spite of these individual properties feeling like nothing's being done, conversely to that, I think people are just broadly concerned about the amount of construction activity in town. These are snaps off of GIS from this morning. The image on the left is kind of the core part of town and the number of issued open building permits. The image on the right are building permits that have been submitted or under review but have not been issued yet. And so in a few months from now, a large number of those squares on the right will be included in the diagram on the left. The next bullet down, or the next paragraph down, is just a summary from a memo that we provided to council several weeks ago when we were talking about development review in general. Over the last 3 years, we've issued nearly 1,500 building permits with nearly $900 million worth of permit valuation. And I don't say this next point flippantly. We hear from members of the community pretty regularly that they feel that there's a construction project on every block. I don't think that this is a wrong perception. And I think if you look at that map on the left, there's a lot of activity going on across town.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ben, because I just really wanted a little bit of context. We know your department in particular is under a lot of pressure, whether we're looking at code changes or a new AACP in 2027 or 2028, or as others have said, just fine tuning and zooming in on just specific aspects of that. But for all these projects, there's the initial review, some are renovations, some are remodels, some are new homes. There's then inspections, is the work being done properly, and certificate of occupancy towards the end. So I just wanted to kind of put the context to all that is going on in our town. And I would just footnote that this obviously doesn't include construction projects on Red Mountain and remodels and undeveloped lots there. So we do have a lot going on in our community, and we can go into what we were calling the stalled projects at this point.
I'm going to turn this slide over to Bonnie, and I might jump in a little bit. But with the specific properties that the mayor asked about, the memo breaks them down into 3 categories. I think the first one are things with active building permits, but we know have had long-standing community concerns that there haven't been sufficient progress being made. The second are properties that are in a dilapidated state that we know there's probably some future development or redevelopment going to be happening. And then a third category of the Lift 1 corridor developments that certainly have big community interest, big community concern for some, but I really do think are in a different category from 1 and 2. So with that, turn things over to Bonnie to talk in some detail about each of these properties and where things stand. But this was kind of the heart of the memo.
Yes, I appreciate that so much, and I'm going to make just one other comment before you get started. As I read through that memo, I thought that one of the most important things for us to bear in mind and to really convey to the public is that after vesting has expired, the building permits and the building application approval does not go away. Vesting just assures that your project would not have to comply to any new codes or requirements or exactions that might be passed in the period from your initial approval to your vesting expiring. So I think that sometimes people think that when vesting has expired, the project has expired or its approvals have expired, and that's simply not the case. So as we look at potential solutions to some of the issues, it's a matter of perhaps changing code to deal with what a project may have to do if vesting has expired, or pre-vesting type of conditions that we would like on our town. So thank you. And please go ahead, Bonnie.
So in that first category, we included the Aspen Club, the former Crystal Palace at 300 East Hyman, as well as the kind of 400 block of East Cooper, 420 and 434 East Cooper in particular. Each of these are in a different state of construction. We have seen signs at that Aspen Club that they might be getting going again. We have a change order that has been approved actually since we published the memo. That was just on Friday that change order has been approved. The Crystal Palace is currently working through a change order, and for 20 East Cooper has some open businesses. We have the Jazz Aspen venue that has opened there recently. The corner building, 434 East Cooper, is currently working on their tenant improvement. So we expect to see that corner looking very much cleaned up by the summer, which is exciting. Then in our next category,
Let me stop you for 1 second. Can you tell us what is involved in a change order and what sometimes it's the developer who takes a long time to submit a change order, so then it takes staff time to review it. What does a change order really mean?
Anytime there's going to be a new design that wasn't included in the original approved plans, it requires a change order. On all of these projects, they were significant enough that they had to go back through the planning process and get revised planning approvals as well. So there was a land use component and then a building permit that would capture those changes. So significant design changes that on all of these have taken months of back and forth between our review teams and the applicants.
And what type of pressure does that put on our staff to say, hey, you're holding us up. We just wanted to change 3 of the windows, the bathrooms, and where the affordable housing unit is?
You know, it adds just work to a queue that's already long. You know, it's part of our process. I think there's very few buildings that get built without any change orders, but it certainly, you know, lengthens the process for everyone.
I will say the other real big challenge, each of these has had, you know, at least one change order, and a couple of them have had a couple. We bring our permits in through a program called Salesforce. You've heard about Salesforce. All of the plans, when they come in, sit in something called Bluebeam, and it's kind of an industry standard markup tool and repository of plans that most architects, most engineers, everybody's pretty familiar with it across the industry. But it's where, while we're reviewing these, the plan sets that come in from applicants kind of sit. If a layperson was to go into the file structure for any of these 3 projects and try to differentiate what's currently being reviewed and kind of these multiple iterations of these projects over, in the case of Aspen Club and Spa, more than 10 years now, Bidwell pushing on 10 years now, Crystal Palace pushing on 10 years now. It's a spider web of complexity that most lay people would have difficulty to kind of differentiating through. So I will say, just in terms of, yes, staff time, but also just these are complex, big projects, and keeping just the simple fact of keeping track of these drawings is that over time, as page after page after page gets resubmitted in terms of changes to either the land use approval or the iterations of the building permit over time, it's a real challenge to keep track of what's the current proposal.
And I'd imagine they will pay for staff time, but they don't pay a charge for change orders per se?
Oh, no, there's significant cost to the applicants to do change orders.
And it's staff time is the primary
essentially staff
charge?
time, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments on that? I just wanted to get that out there. It's not I got a change order on Monday and it's going to be issued on Friday.
The other thing, just for a little bit of optimism too, because again, I know that this is a difficult topic for the community. I was thrilled to see Jazz Aspen Snowmass open in December. It's a fantastic space. I think it's a fantastic community asset. There was a lot of work that was done by the applicant, by Jazz Aspen, by our team to get that open and up and running, similarly to the retail spaces down below. There were moments in the last 18 months where I was concerned that we were going to have another big lull on the Bidwell building on the corner across from Paradise. There's been a lot of progress that's made, and I think we're getting close to that part of the world coming back to a shape that I think we all expect it to be. And if you would have asked me that 18 months ago or 2 years ago, I don't know that I would have had a lot of confidence in that. And so I do think that there's been some real progress made. And similarly at Aspen Club, I mean, that project's been difficult, and it's been difficult for the ownership, it's been difficult for the design teams who have been working on it, it's been difficult for our staff, and I would say that there's been a lot of very concerted effort from the applicant team to put pressure on us to meet our timelines to get that change order issued so that they can, what we anticipate to be fully activating that site again towards completion of the project. And again, if you would have asked me a year ago if we would have this ready to go right now, I would have had some skepticism. So I feel like there's been some progress on all three of those projects made.
Okay, thank you.
We have the second category of projects that don't have a current building permit. The last one on the list, 730 East Cooper, the former Buckhorn Arms, Johnny McGuire's Domino's, for people who've been here that long. They do have a building permit application in for, I think, what's known as the base hotel, and that is very close to being able to be issued. So that's different than 404 Park and 500 West Hopkins, where they don't have a land use approval or building permit application.
Let me ask a question on the Buckhorn Arms building. When I was on council before, they had come in to request not having to do the parking on site and to make their lowest level into more of to make their, that's okay, thank you, Grassroots, to make their more of a gathering room in the basement rather than the parking, and push the parking off street. I recall suggesting, why don't you include it in one of your other buildings, like the Crystal Palace building or something like that? But is the new program asking to eliminate parking now?
Not eliminate, but reduce and reconfigure. And there was actually kind of in the previous, there's been several iterations in that subgrade space over time. There had been a Turkish bath plan, there had been a bowling alley plan, there had been some more extensive commercial space planned. And now I believe that the one single level below grade, which just because of how tight the site is going to involve a car elevator to go down a level off the alley, certainly all serviced by valet parking, because it's going to be tight down there and difficult to navigate parking down there. So the spots that are going to be down there are going to be tight to navigate. But yeah, that subgrade space in that building has been the topic of several of their proposed changes to the project over the years.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this first or second category that have been brought forward?
I have two questions. One, on the Buckhorn Arms building, it says the building permit's been in review since 2020. Is that on delay on both the applicant and staff and back and forth, or that's a long time to have a building permitted?
Oh, certainly. And I would say those subgrade iterations that have been proposed, I do think that there have been significant delays across that time, or gaps where, we had given comments and they're making decisions about how to respond to those comments and what their future plans are. But absolutely 6 years, 5 to 6 years is a long time for permit review. And some of that is because our land use code, and I mentioned this in the memo, some of it is our land use code and building permit processes are not super nimble in response to some of the changes that have been proposed to these properties over time. And some of it, I think, is some uncertainty from the development team as to what ultimately they wanted to do with the property and whether they were going to invest in the kind of design changes that were necessary to get through a building permit with different iterations. I mean, it's been an iterative project over this 6 years.
Okay. And then with the other two, the pre-application summary, can you talk a little bit more about that? When I read that, I kind of see delay tactic.
Well, or optimism,
Okay.
depending on how we see amounts of water in a glass. I think on both 404 Park and the former Boomerang, these are projects that have previously had land use approvals associated with them or have gone very far down land use processes only to have them fall apart. They've been sitting there for some time now in their current state. A little bit of difference between Boomerang and it's a designated historic site that we've been more carefully paying attention to its condition than 404 Park, where we've really just been making life safety assessments. There's some explanation, I think, in the memo as to why those two projects find themselves in this disappointing amount of progress for the community. But 404 Park pretty much has to be a 100% deed-restricted affordable project if they want to have a relatively minimal land use process associated with any changes. We have received a request for a pre-application on both that project and the former Boomerang. Former Boomerang, you know, I'm going to say I'm optimistic on both of them because I think there's dynamics on both of those properties that there's kind of an opening now for a path forward where there might not have been several months ago. And so my perspective on the pre-application is more optimistic
Okay.
than continued time killing.
Okay, thanks.
Other board questions or comments at this point? We'll let you carry on.
And then on our Lift 1 corridor, we have building permits that are actively being reviewed, and those are huge applications, some of the biggest building permits that I've seen since I've been with the city, but we're making a lot of progress meeting with those teams regularly on their applications, but happy to answer any questions on those.
Just a couple of details to add to that. Both of those projects are pursuing phased permits, which used to be a more regular approach within our department and has kind of went away about 10 years ago as a kind of standard kind of response to big projects, both residential and commercial. And it seemed absolutely necessary to pursue a phased issuance, I think both for the applicant team and for staff, to have some clarity about these big projects and how much of it needed to be reviewed at what point. Obviously, Lift 1 Lodge was at least a year ahead of the Gorsuch House plan development, and I know both of these projects are going by different names in the community. This is the name of their plan development, so I'm sticking with that until I hear otherwise, but formally. But I think on both of these projects, and the memo was pretty clear about this, there is a construction sequencing agreement that is necessary, was required by both of the approval ordinances that ultimately were passed by voters, which was very intentional by staff, seen as very important to the stakeholders that were participating in these projects. And it is city staff's very clear perspective that we will not be issuing any further work on this property until that sequencing agreement is executed. And so, you know, broadly, we were anticipating issuing the kind of first phase of Lift 1 Lodge end of March with some anticipated start with construction on site in April. To be honest with you, I don't know where that timeline starts because of this construction sequencing agreement and negotiations that are happening amongst the parties to land on a final construction sequencing agreement.
Okay. Thank you for that. Hopefully they can agree soon because they're missing the building season, as it were. Additional comments or questions that you have for us?
The only thing, and it's blocked a little bit by the Talking Aspen City Council down there, you know, these projects were identified as the mayor. I just wanted to give the opportunity if there were any other properties or projects across town that council had questions about in terms of current status.
I was waiting until the end. That was just
Okay.
comments later.
Did anyone else have any idea? I just kind of came up with the major ones that neighbors and friends had asked me about and that you can see visually. Okay. I think we're then, you know, kind of moving into the whys and what can be done about it. I think it is worth noting, obviously, that we have other major development, such as we're going to see tomorrow night again with the Aspen Meadows, such as the hospitals playing with the Beaumont, and probably a number of other projects you've heard about that we haven't yet. So.
Yeah. So again, you know, this is kind of the heart of the memo, and I'm happy to talk about each of these individually, you know, should council want to talk about them. But I do think that this dynamic where we have very valuable property with very significant investment, both in terms of the purchase of those properties, the design necessary to go through, to get a land use approval or to submit for building permit. It's unusual to see projects hanging out. In most places, the desire for cash flow and revenues coming into a project gives much more pressure, I think, to construction projects getting done in a timely fashion. And, as I explained a little bit, and, I've got perspectives on this. I'm probably not the best expert. There are people who understand the nuances of this much better than I, but as I have observed some of these dynamics over the years that I've been with the city of Aspen, it's taken me a bit to wrap my head around this because I think they're dynamics that are not typically found in most communities. I do think that we have a tendency by some developers to get speculative land use approvals where they get a land use approval and then don't have a tenant in mind, or maybe have a tenant in mind and that tenant backs out. And so those land use approvals might not be as certain to what they actually want to do with their property. I do think that the relationship of these projects to national and global brands adds a dynamic that complicates some of these projects. I'm going to skip down to number 5. The costs of development in Aspen are not...
Steep.
Yeah, what's the right word? Stratospheric, and there's a lot of risk in that. And I certainly understand that dynamic where the kinds of dollars that we're talking about for investment in, what I think in most places would be seen as pretty typical commercial space is unbelievable when you start talking to people about what that actually costs. And there's a lot of risk. And so if you're going to actually initiate a construction project or finish a construction project, you're outlaying significant sums of money. And if you're not quite sure of who your tenant's going to be at the end of that project, that's a huge risk. I think there's certainly a dynamic in this town between primarily federal tax codes and Aspen real estate values where there is a path to make a property very profitable by just sitting on it. And I think that is a dynamic that is very true here. 3 and 4 kind of go together because I do think they speak to affordable housing opportunities, particularly the 404 Park property. I talked a little bit about this in the memo where because our affordable housing mitigation requirements are, again, fairly significant, developers want to get ahead of that and look out for opportunities for how to meet those mitigation requirements. And so they're speculating in affordable housing projects. And when the commercial projects that they were thinking about, the connection of those two things kind of stall, the associated affordable housing projects also stall. And so I think that probably is an explanation on 404 Park. I mean, that 404 Park, under a previous owner, we had a building permit for that project that was ready to issue, and it was never picked up. And I think that dynamic contributed, particularly in 404 Park, to some of this. And then lastly, related to 404 Park, and I think also the Buckhorn Arms building, and I kind of knew this vaguely, but I looked into it a little bit, and it's absolutely true. I think there's some question of like, why weren't those two buildings just torn down if you didn't know what exactly you wanted to do with them? Why didn't you just take the buildings down and figure it out later? It's my understanding that if you have a vacant piece of property versus a property with development on it, that the property tax assessment is 7-fold. And I think that there has been certainly considerations of that dynamic in terms of the decisions on these buildings that I think we would all agree would probably better serve the community if they came down. They've stayed up, and I think partially as an explanation of that. And then lastly, for a very long time, Aspen's land use code and site-specific approvals. When I say site-specific approvals, these are the approvals that this board grants to a project, whether it's a planned development or not. Historic Preservation Commission grants a site-specific approval. Planning and Zoning Commission can grant site-specific approvals. And we also grant site-specific approvals that are administrative in nature. I think that there are lots of qualities that all of our regulation and those approvals grant to the community. Being nimble to the ebbs and flows and realities of construction projects is not one of the qualities that is built into Aspen's regulatory system. And there is, as we've talked about, huge amounts of change, and every time one of those changes happen, we're unwinding a very specific approval or a very specific code regulation. In some of these cases that have, properties that have been around, we're contemplating the 2014 code versus the 2025 code that these projects are on, as we're thinking about exactly how to think about, the changes that are being proposed. So again, fairly significant part of the memo. We can talk about any of these individually if council wants to talk through them a little bit more. And certainly, I've got a pretty high level understanding of most of this, but I'm not a real estate developer to understand the nuanced dynamics of this. But these are things in my observations over the last several years that explain why some of these projects are doing what they're doing.
Thank you for that. Bill, why don't you start us off?
Thanks. This is very thoughtful, Ben, and intelligent. I agree with most of it. I think it's helpful for us. I don't say this to correct you, just because it may help frame and understand things better. I think the property tax thing that you're referring to is when you take down developed residential property and then you become taxed at commercial tax rates. I don't think if you're already commercial property, there's an impact there. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure that that's one of the primary underlying causes on these specific projects, at least. I think many of the other things you hit on here are the primary causes that are sort of more general. I think there's some very specific causes on these properties, particularly that are intertwined into number 2 there that are unique. The second thing is, and I don't say this to defend these projects or the people behind them, and I don't say it because I think it's one of the top 5 reasons for these delayed projects, but I do think it's worthwhile for us to own this in relationship to the cost and time of development and construction in Aspen. And so that's why I think it's worth saying right now, is that our processes for both land use and building permits are highly inefficient. And I've talked about that at length, and I know you and your team are working on it, and we have consultants working on it. But I think that needs to be acknowledged and owned, and so that's why I say that.
Yeah. Again, I think they do many things. They're not nimble.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
John?
Yeah, Ben, I just want to thank you for really explaining all of these different sites in great detail. I think as a community member, I've never seen a developer come to town and willingly let paying renters leave. I don't think any of us has seen this before. This is kind of a new thing. And normally developers come, they get their approvals, they get to work, and they redevelop, and they get new renters in there. That hasn't happened in these cases. The fact that Park Avenue apartments were approved for 28 units, and now it's been sitting empty, I think is a really sad state of affairs. So I would totally support some way to keep this from happening again, whatever it takes.
Thank you. Yeah, I can look at some of these projects and know they were disrupted, as we all were, with COVID for a period of time. And there's those sort of things happen as well, and a kind of restabilization of the world economy and the market really had to occur after that. So there are things that are beyond any of our control that can affect this sort of thing at all. What I have been thinking about, and I'm sure there's other ways of looking at it, it's a little vague to begin with, but should we change our code kind of pre-development, pre-application, to say that, our commercial buildings need to be kept in a certain level of repair, and that buildings that are vacated pre-development must be, whether it's, the term is covered or sequestered, kind of thinking about what they actually did do on the edge of the Cooper Street Mall, where it was safely kind of wire fenced off, but then covered with banners about the town, and something to deal with the appearance that it needs to be maybe a requirement to be able to submit for a building application to say what appearance will we leave this building in the meanwhile until we're demolishing or breaking ground. That's one type of idea I've thought about. The other, and I'm sure there's pros and cons to these. I'm not, trying to say I have the solutions here. But to change the code so that if a project has not begun before their vesting expires, they will be subject to a higher affordable housing mitigation, even if the code hasn't changed for everyone else, kind of. But if there's this speculative element that this property is worth $30 million now, and if I hold it vacant for 10 years, it's going to be worth 45. That is not working well for our community. And I think that you need to create a mechanism to kind of pull down those perceived profits of just holding a vacant building, whether it's additional housing requirements or other aspects that you might be able to think of. But I think we need to find a way into the path, as it were, between state code investing and our own land use code to say, in between those two, what can we do that would kind of further this? I also don't know exactly, but you kind of get a sense of this sequence that someone's gotten their approval and then they'll go in for a demolition permit and they'll do, get that permit, and then that will keep everything alive for 1 year until they then do a foundation permit and then, the next level of permit. Can those timelines be shortened, or should they be shortened? That, your excavation was finished in 2 months and you don't apply for the foundation permit till 8 months later. How do we shorten those timelines in between things? And again, given state law and other considerations.
I will say to that, I think that dynamic that you just described is one of the reasons why phase permitting went away 10 years ago, and that we have reluctantly brought it back. Was there is risk when we go down the phase permit path that the dynamic that you just described becomes a reality on things. And so I will say it's one of the things, while we're optimistic about phase permitting, making things better for both staff and applicants, that topic is a concern for us as we go through phasing.
I know that one of the elements talked about, and is always controversial, is whether completion bonds should be required. It adds expense to a project, but I don't know if perhaps it's something that, rather than starts at the middle, should start in the, starts at the beginning, should start in the middle of any sort of phased permitting plan. That, that should there not be the submittal of what is needed within X many days after phase one, going into phase two will require a completion bond. And again, I understand there's the pros and cons. It could be a new expense, and so now we're not going to do the project. We're just going to try and sell the project to someone. But on the other hand, this is about finding the right series of incentives and disincentives. And I'm just trying to think about any proposals I can. So the rest of the board, if you have any ideas, and Bill, you've been certainly in that industry more than the rest of us, if you have ideas that would be, again, that incentive and disincentive to dragging it out and just kind of sitting on a property because it's appreciating 10% a year.
Want me to start?
Yeah, please.
I think, first of all, it's important to remember that all but one of these projects, not the Category 3 projects, those are, I think, on their way and in the grand scheme of the size and complexity of those projects, are not moving all that slowly and aren't really stalled. They just haven't really started yet. So I view those as totally different.
Yeah.
They're big, they're impactful, yes.
But, yeah.
But really not
They're in process.
not the same. So all but one of the others are from the same group of people, with very unique circumstances that I've never seen anywhere else, Aspen's never seen, don't seem to make a lot of sense on the surface level at least, why they're the way they are. And I think we should all keep that in mind, because I don't think that we want to regulate around one very specific set of circumstances and cause more trouble than we're solving for. Also, anything that we talk about here probably isn't going to affect those projects, right? Not all of them, but most of them have entitlements already, and we can't really do anything to affect those projects. Maybe some small things, but the bigger things aren't going to affect those projects, so we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, this is forward-looking, because we have a lot of blocks left in the downtown that are very old, one-story buildings, things like this.
Right.
We'll see future. This is about the future.
And then, the other one on those categories 1 and 2 is Aspen Club, which unfortunately went through some, and is still continuing to go through some very complicated partnership and financial challenges. I know less about that one than maybe I do about the others, but again, these I think are anomalies. They're not the ordinary course of business. They're obviously impactful. I would love to do something about them, but I don't want to cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
I'll throw out a couple ideas that aren't on this list. They're not so earth-shattering, and then I'll talk about some of these things. I do like the idea of exploring some sort of, I know we have like a demolition by neglect type of provision, but I'm wondering if we can go further in that. I think that's a good thing for the community. And I think that should apply to all property. Everything from deed-restricted residential up. I just think that we should have Aspen-level standards for maintaining the exterior of your property, like they do in a HOA. And I'm very interested in exploring that. Others will come to me. Completion, I'll talk about this list and then weave back if the others come to me, but completion bonds, Rachel, what concerns me there is like, there is a market for completion bonds on like infrastructure projects or completing a sidewalk that's on city property, for example. I don't know that there's any market for a completion bond on an entire privately developed building. I don't think such a thing exists. So costs would be extraordinarily high if you could find somebody to do it. But I don't even think that there's somebody that would do such a thing. Like, I can't imagine that there's some kind of insurance company that would be like, oh, Sam wants to build a high-rise tower. I'm going to charge him 10 cents on the dollar and I'll have to step in and finish this whole building. It just seems like really unusual to me for that to exist. I'm not an expert in that, but that sounds really challenging to me. I'm opposed to the vacancy tax, not because I don't think that it has the right sort of idea, but I just think it'd be so easy to get around that. I could open up an art gallery that's never open to the public and hang one piece of art in it, and it's not vacant anymore. Just like too easy to exploit that, and we'd spend so much time creating the regulations, and I don't think they'd be effective. So that's why I don't want to go down that path. Temporary encroachment fees cuts both ways. I think does it help with some of our current situation? Yes, but does it penalize a lot of other people? Also, yes. I struggle with that one.
And I would say our current fees are not low.
They are not low.
Yeah.
No, they add significantly to the cost of development, and they're unavoidable in most cases. You can minimize duration if you work really hard, but building in the core, you can't avoid encroachment fees particularly. So
I mentioned this in the memo, but just to give a sense of what that means, for the Crystal Palace, their current right-of-way encroachment costs them roughly $350,000 a year. do the math backwards about the number of years that we've put that into the right-of-way. And so, we're not talking small, insignificant sums of money, and I wonder what that number, as a, a punitive disincentive, what that number needs to be to actually serve that outcome.
Yeah.
Can I keep going so I don't lose my train of thought?
Yeah, go
Rachel? Things not on this list that are coming back to my head. I've brought this up before in a different context, but I think it could be effective here and could help solve more than one thing. Response timelines on both sides, both on the applicant side and on the city side. I don't think that they're universal. I think that we need to carve out sort of the situations in certain ways, but I do think that could be effective. And if you don't respond to permit comments or land use comments within a certain amount of time, you start back at the starting line. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I also think that there could be different costs of change orders. So, a change order to move a wall 6 inches over should be very inexpensive to do that. And those are the types of things, Bonnie referred to, every building pretty much has some degree of change orders, and things evolve through the course of a project. But if you're revisiting land use approvals through the course of a change order, maybe that's a different financial structure. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then the last sort of new idea is like, what kind of inspection threshold is truly reasonable to continue to extend the duration of construction? I know we have a good provision saying that the chief building official can extend a building permit if you can make a good case. But, in a case where it's happening over and over again, is having one bathroom inspected sufficient? I don't know. I don't know how much leeway or judgment you have on that, or whether we can regulate around that or not, but I think that could be interesting to explore as well.
Yeah, we do have quite a bit of discretion. The code is, vague for a reason, to give staff that opportunity. I think our challenge has been, if the permit expires, is that helping the project get, in a lot of these cases, if their building permit expires, then they're kicked back to needing all new land use approvals, all new building permits, which may not serve the end that the community wants. It's always a balancing act and something we're trying to weigh when we're making those decisions.
Yeah, totally valuable. If it's a real threat, though, maybe people behave differently. I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah. Is that threat enough?
I don't know that you've ever done it, at least not on projects of this kind of magnitude.
We have not.
And I don't know if it would change
Right.
the direction of things. I have no clue on these particular projects or any future project. I just don't know. Like, these projects are stalled for a whole variety of reasons, like Ben and Bonnie explained nicely, and financial seems to be sort of the low in the pecking order of why they're stalled. So I don't know that changes it. Time, maybe time does. I just don't know. I struggle with reducing vesting periods. I don't think 3 years is that long as our baseline anyways, and we don't have a lot of examples of longer than 3 years, I don't think. Fixed construction timelines, I also struggle with, because you just never know what's going to happen in construction. I mean, you can hit the quote-unquote dinosaur bones, and that really throws you for a loop, and that's not anyone's fault. So I struggle with that one. Again, I don't want to do more harm than good. And then condemnation, eminent domain, we have those powers. I think you phrased it correctly, engage in. We haven't used those. I think it would be extraordinarily litigious to try to use those. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not excited about that idea. That's all my feedback.
Great. Thank you. Very good comments. You know, the only thing that I had thought, which you were hitting on this, the temporary encroachment fees, to be able to say to a project, we're going to refund some of that if you finish earlier on time, and we're going to increase the fee if you have not finished on time. That does have to have something to do with a part of a project's approval, so that we have a sense of a timeline for that. But that's, you know, I'd love to be able to say, hey, if you're out of here faster, we'll refund some of the money you've already spent.
More carrots, less sticks. I love that.
Yeah, something like that. Other council members' comments or ideas? John and then Christine, and then back around.
I support finding anything possible to, again, just restating kind of what I said earlier, we have several buildings in the downtown core too, which have been under construction for nearly 10 years. I think as a tourist destination that's relying on the tourist economy, that's not a good look for our city. And I think 10 years of having vacant buildings is too long, and I'd like to avoid that at all costs in the future. I trust staff to work with the ideas that Bill and Rachel have come up with and the ideas you've already presented with us to come up with something that we can, something.
Something. Yeah, Christine?
I have a few scattered thoughts, so I'll try to put them in order. Bill, I appreciate your comments on the city owning this as partially a process issue. And then also acknowledging that this is largely attributed to one landowner or property owner. We do have two examples of lodging properties on Main Street that were completed. I don't know the timelines, but completed pretty quickly. They didn't sit vacant for long. Wonder what worked well there. I know we can't really compare apples to oranges, but I think projects are getting done and they're not facing the same problem.
Yeah, I would say on both of those projects, interestingly, both of them actually went through very significant land use approval processes, had change orders, you know, modified design, modified a bunch of things. Both of them came in for change orders. Both of them had land use approvals that were necessary to accommodate those change orders. But I think the difference is once those projects started, they wanted those projects to be up and running. And I think both of them pursued a construction schedule that is more typical, I think. We could say the same thing for the W. Big lodge project. I think that they were tied up, you know, BOE, CO, people in like 24 months. You know, from the time of breaking ground. I mean, they really moved on that project. I think that's about right. But again, I think it's this impetus of once projects get up and running, like most construction projects. I think to Bill's point, I agree with you that some of this is an anomaly. I think we have to be careful of not over-regulating the whole system. But there's definitely a way to get projects done quickly in Aspen once construction initiates.
So I'll jump to another point and then back to another point. In reference to one particular landowner just shooting high ideas, can you make permits contingent on one another? So if one project is stalled or incomplete, that they can't get permits for another project?
That all depends on the ownership structure. If they have different LLCs controlling each project, even though it's one person up above pulling the strings, it can be a little complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just throwing out big ideas. Also, and this is really out there, but is there any sort of like antitrust law where you can limit the number of commercial properties that one person can own in a town? I don't know if this has been done anywhere or if it's even worth looking at, but that might potentially solve.
I think there might be something like that as well. But
Okay. Okay. And then back to sort of the solutions that we are looking at here. I would defer to incentives on something like this because that's what I think where we want to operate from. But seeing as the free market is not incentive enough for this property owner or some of like ones, I think that we should be doing something bold on this. I think that I don't want to use the word punitive, but this is one of the things I hear about from the community the most, and I think that they really want to see some action on this. I think there's a range of solutions here, and I don't have, a set direction on which one, but I would like us to see some whatever we can do to try to solve for this. And I know that you are working so hard on it too.
Yeah. Just a quick response to that, and just to clarify what's up here. I think this I've been with the city for roughly 10 years, and, even pre-COVID, we were having conversations about several of these properties and evaluating these things. I think both CommDev staff, I think the city attorney's office over time has been requested to kind of evaluate these things. I think certainly staff, if we can identify things that are incentives, I really like the sort of encroachment rebate kind of idea, partially because it's engineering's dollars and not CommDev's dollars. But I'll bring that up with Tricia and see what she thinks about that. But I think that all of these we've evaluated and we've looked at them, and are they legally possible? Are they practically possible? But several of these, again, whether they be, encroachment fees or expiring building permits or vacating land use approvals, they're punitive in nature. And even something, if we could figure out something like a completion bond or an eminent domain proceeding, even to the kind of far end of the spectrum of tools that municipalities have kind of in responding to some of these dynamics, like the question is, does it translate into projects being completed
On time or sooner.
On time or sooner. And I think staff has questions about each one of these things, about whether they would really move the needle on, legal, practical, and would they really sort of translate into observable changes in timelines and what's going on a particular property. And again, I think in staff's evaluation, I've got a slide, the next slide's a little bit about this, but we've looked at this stuff. I think there's some possible ideas here. I think there's, I've heard a couple of good ideas in some of the other comments this evening, but I do think that that's important to kind of think about each of these things is like legal, practical, and then ultimately would they change the dynamic? And I think your struggle is the same as our struggle. It's like what's the thing? And I don't have crystal clear answers on those things. I don't think either one of us do.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Sam?
Some comments and the questions. But first off, I'm very happy that we're talking about this. I don't think we've talked about it in such a straightforward manner before at the council table, so I consider this a huge stride, at least for PR purposes, if not for actually trying to accomplish something, so thank you for scheduling it.
Yeah.
Secondly, I just wanted to mention that, we at the city, we focus on the things we can control, and that's why I get excited about things like the Armory project, because it's supposed to be the opposite of what we're talking about here. It's not supposed to be an eyesore. It's not supposed to, it is supposed to be a community space, and it is supposed to produce things like sales tax. So when I talk about this, I'm thinking about the fact that this is a blight on the community because it is an eyesore, it's loss of sales tax, and it's loss of community space for at least some of these projects. With that, I just wanted to ask some philosophical questions, or, from your experience, I'm just thinking about what are the criteria that only an unreasonable actor to the community would have for projects like this? If you don't need to answer it now, it's just maybe food for thought as far as if you broke this down into what you thought was unreasonable. Because I love carrots, but I do think we need some major sticks for what the vast majority of this community would consider unreasonable, and then find some pretty punitive measures for that. because again, I'm only talking about the most unreasonable, and because so many of this economic equation and is kind of perverse to how this community should operate. And I'm not even trying to target the one developer that has done this, because they could be doing something mentally that's just different than the way I'm thinking about. But the point is, we're coming from the community perspective, and if we could hone in again on the criteria that you think about from these projects or others that are, once again, I keep using the word unreasonable, those are the ones I'd really want to target with certain disincentive manners. I had one thought, but first I wanted to ask, related to the certain developer, as far as if you have an answer for this, what we might have learned from the Main Street Bakery project. That took a number of years. I remember you talking about like change orders there. Obviously, they have a tenant in now. And, you know, again, not everyone, especially in this community, can afford to go to St. Ambrose. But again, it's not an eyesore. It at least is producing sales tax, and it is a community space for some. So the real question is like, how can we get something like that happening sooner? And again, maybe not for now, but like, what lessons can we learn from that to be like, how do we get these places up and running sooner from incentives, but especially from disincentives if someone's doing something unreasonable. And then there's so many like ideas that have been pointed out. This is like a very encouraging, disencouraging conversation, because most of what has been said, at least from your end, who I consider the expert on this, has been, we've thought of so many things, but it's really obviously difficult to tackle an issue like this. You know, I've been reading about it, and most of them are like the same as these. The only other one I like thought of as like a out-of-the-box idea is how, again, if you came up with criteria, as the city sets, we have mill levies, property taxes, and just wondering if you could do a really punitive measure via property taxes on some of these things that may meet some pretty awful, unreasonable criteria. Because, I mean, I remember asking years ago about impact fees and all these different things, and I'm just like, what do we control here, and what can we really do in a punitive measure, again, for what is truly unreasonable? Because, again, I want to be as crystal clear. If you're a developer and you're trying and you run into some hardship, the Aspen Club, or you're just trying to work through things, I think you can explain that in a very reasonable manner. I think some of these other things where it takes a certain number of years, it reaches that level of unreasonable. It is a blight to this community. It is a loss of sales tax. And it's one of those things where the economic equation should change, where the city should be able to regroup that. I remember you asking a question about completion bonds and where that money should go. I mean, to me, it should go towards community spaces like the Armory. So I think we have plenty of uses for the money that would be like a Dante's Inferno's approach, where the punishment would ironically fit the crime. But again, I think the next step in my mind is coming up with that unreasonable criteria behavior and then trying to tackle that. So I think that's the best I can say tonight, because it seems like this is not going to be solved very easily.
Yeah, well, I like the way you kind of backed into the approach, to go by deciding what's unreasonable and non-productive to the community. I like that.
Thank you.
We did just receive an email about the idea of a disuse tax on commercial properties that are vacant for over 182 days, and that's coming out of the San Francisco area. It's taking a look at the millions of lost sales tax from disuse of a commercial building. I don't know where or what the value of that would be, but I'd love you to look into that. I think it's a little different than a vacancy tax, so it might.
They're terms that are used interchangeably. I think there might be some nuance in the difference of it. I think the conversation about vacancy tax, I think it's been happening at the state of Colorado level, has really been focused on residential properties.
Yep.
In support of housing affordability. But San Francisco, to my knowledge, is the only community in the United States that's put either a disuse tax or a commercial vacancy tax in place. It's currently under litigation, has not at least in our investigation, has not translated into a lot of tangible outcomes within San Francisco. I think it's an interesting concept, and I don't,
Yeah.
the outcome I think that you're trying to sort of get at in terms of this lost sales tax revenue from these very valuable spaces with, is a huge concern to the community beyond the sort of aesthetics and the sort of just loss of the use. But
Well, I just wanted to throw it out there that we'd gotten this email, and it does seem at some small level to maybe tag in with what Sam is suggesting, because if there was a property tax fix or something like that, it would have to go to the voters to approve, and maybe it is a property tax associated with disuse of a commercial building. It's, again, we're all just, grasping at straws or what sort of ideas might work. The other might be, is there different requirements we want to put on a demolition permit that you cannot demolish until you have approved plans for the new building, something like that. And as I talked about before, some sort of code requirements about the condition in which a building is kept or the site is kept before we will even accept a building application to review. So that we have some more controls on the front side as opposed to once we're already in the process. I think that would be one way to look at it. Other than that, we like to be on the cutting edge here, but we just don't like to cut ourselves. So we have to be very careful with that. And if we have further ideas or you have further questions for us.
Lastly, and I think if the conversation's exhausted and we can move on, but I do think just for the community's benefit, I wanted to talk a little bit about CommDev's basic approach to this. I want to, and I think in your comments this evening, council recognizes staff is not resigned to this dynamic. We are, constantly trying to figure it out, constantly trying to figure out how to respond. But we are pretty constrained by basic property rights, statutory and common law vesting, and then, inefficient, not particularly nimble land use and building code provisions. But I would say that I hope council and the community has confidence that, we try to be flexible within our current codes to keep projects moving along. We've probably been overly generous in the bounds of the flexibility that we can on a couple of occasions where, we felt like we were on a cusp that things, if we just did this, this project's going to sort of launch in a different way. But I do want to make sure that everybody understands that there's a few places of discretion around granting extensions. The types of inspected work, I think, was an idea that was discussed previously. We're true to the codes. We're true to our policies when we make those decisions. But when we have an opportunity to apply discretion, when we do have an opportunity to apply to be flexible, we have tended to do so because we think that that's the right path in terms of actually getting these projects moving forward. If we feel like at several moments, if we would have taken a rigid line, expiring a building permit, if we really sort of went to the brass tacks, we're uncertain of whether that would have any positive effect. In fact, we're generally confident that that would go backwards on a lot of these projects. And also, and I think that, ultimately it's our job to carry out our codes and our processes that we've established, and to be responsive to our customers. And that dynamic is important to us as well. And it's been it remains a difficult thing. It remains, I think, one of the more frustrating things about Bonnie and my jobs. We know that it's certainly frustrating across the community, but we've tried to find this balance as we've moved through these I think I used the word confounding dynamics of this. So with that, that's kind of what staff wanted to convey, but I'm happy to talk about anything else that council would like to chat about.
Well, the one thing I think I just need to put out there is that I think we could look at what sort of commercial growth allocations we have in the Aspen area, in our building codes today. The GMQS, I know it's commercial now, not residential at all, but given where we're at, do we really want to say we need another 40 hotel beds every year? Or do we really want to say we want X amount of redevelopment of commercial space every year? I think that when we look at the amount of construction going on in town, the remodelings, the residential up in the county surrounding us, what we are experiencing in our downtown core, I don't know that we want to keep that engine open and that door open that says, bring us more projects, bring us more projects. And that's what the message is right now. Borrowing from future years, if your project's bigger than the ones we have available, and so on. So I know it's kind of a root cause of the amount of growth and change that we see occurring, and then we're trying to figure out better ways to manage that growth and change. But the root of it is how much we're saying is acceptable and available for allotments in the commercial core. And I think we should change that, reduce it myself. And the future council can bump it back up again if we don't think we see enough construction over the next 5 years as Aspen Club comes online, the Beaumont Hospital moves forward, the Meadows moves forward, the Lumberyard moves forward, the Lift 1A project moves forward, and all the other projects that have already been approved. I think that starting to slow the faucet down is probably the biggest thing we can do to help this community and see these existing projects, these existing efforts go forward. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else.
If I could, Mayor, just for the community's sake, I just want the community to know that the building and community development building department, they work very hard on this. It is not, I think the perception in the public is because there's no news or you're not seeing action that it's not given the attention it deserves. And I just want to say we have meetings constantly, and anytime they're coming up on deadlines or coming up, we are communicating with these project owners very regularly. So I just want to give your staff kudos because they are very attentive and on top of this issue. But as Ben has pointed out, our remedies are fairly limited. And again, if you're outcome focused, and when I say outcome, I mean getting that project complete, a lot of these remedies don't guarantee you a complete project at the end of the day. So I just want to sort of highlight that it's not, it's not out of any sort of negligence or unwillingness to act on our part. It does suck up a lot of our time and attention in trying to find creative solutions for this. And so I just want to give Ben and his team credit because they do work really hard on this. So, and I know because they come talk to me.
If we're throwing around kudos, the city attorney's office is burdened with this topic pretty regularly as well.
All right. Well, I think unless people have any last thoughts they want to throw out, and certainly email Ben if you have a brainstorm in the middle of the night. But we thank you for your time and prepping for this and your whole department for all the work that they do all the time, every day. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that ends our work session for today. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
Tomorrow will be a healthy agenda.
Yes, it will be. And there are a number of consent items, kind of like roaring back for the year now. So that if you have any questions on any of the consent items in the packet, get them to Pete earlier so he can have either an answer to you or the right staff in the room to be able to answer. Okay? Thanks a lot. Thank you, Gross.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Ben.